Hello everyone and welcome to the final day of the preliminaries of the Charity Cup. It is a game a lot of you have already requested while it was being played. Magnus Carlsen versus Wenjun, so the World Chess Champion versus the Women's World Chess Champion. She won the title 3 times and she will defend her title again this year. So without further ado, let's check it out and see what's happening. It's a very close game. So Magnus with the white pieces opens with e4. We have e5, knight to f3, knight to c6 and bishop to b5. The Rui Lopez is on the board. We have a6, Morphy's defense, bishop to a4 and knight to f6. We have castles and bishop to c5, going for the Neo-Archangelsk structure. We have c3 and now b5, chasing away Carlsen's bishop here, bishop to b3 and d6. So this is all very standard stuff, nothing new here. Both of them playing a very strong theory. We have a4 challenging this expansion on the queen side, and now bishop to b7, as well, if pawn captures, the rook will hang on a8, so we have to play bishop to b7, defend the rook, and it's also a nice diagonal for our bishop. And here, usually d4 is the main idea, but Magnus plays the lesser move, or it's not a lesser move, but it's not played as much. So d3, still waiting with the exchanges, and here just castles. We have bishop to g5 by Magnus, h6, bishop to h4, and now there are a couple of games that reach this exact same position. Interestingly, Magnus Carlsen already had this position in 2013 in the Tata Steel tournament against Ivan Sokolov, where the game continued with queen to e7. Also, some known ideas are g5, just pushing the bishop back to g3, but here we have rook to b8 by Ju, and it is now already, as of move 11, that we have a completely new game. This basically means that the A file is white's to control, and if the position clears up a little bit, you might be able to use it. So here Magnus opens up the A file, captures, and knight b to d2. We have bishop back to c8 now. The rook would be or rather could be useful on the b file if the position opens up, and we might be interested in pinning this knight with bishop to g4. So Magnus stops this, plays h3, and bishop to e6 now. But bishop to e6 might be a slight imprecision, and Magnus quickly shows why. He plays bishop to d5, attacks the knight here, and now, as you can see, the knight doesn't really have any squares. This is covered, this is covered, this is covered, this is covered by the rook, but also, if you put the knight there, then a move like d4 might be very unpleasant. If you play the knight to e7, then we can capture on f6 and mess up the pawn structure, as the queen no longer guards the knight. So here you don't really have a good move. Maybe capturing the bishop, but this just loses on the spot, because after he captures, the knight again doesn't really have a good square. Even if knight to a7 now, we can simply play bishop captures on f6, and after queen captures, and now we go knight to e4. We attack the queen and the bishop. Once the queen moves, we eliminate the bishop, and then we pick up the knight on a7. So similar to the line that we've discussed. So here, bishop back to d7, sort of wasting a move a little bit. And now, what do you play here? Well, the strongest idea here seems to be just trading. Bishop captures, and now d4, grabbing more space in the center. And after captures and captures, bishop to b4, and now queen to b3. This is what the engine thinks that will give white a great position, as the c file is now very weak. We can bring the rook to the c file. Also, the bishop here is very weak, so you might have to give up the bishop pair. But Magnus says nonsense. The strongest move is always and almost in any position pawn to b4. So this is what he plays. He attacks the bishop here, bishop back to b6, and now bishop back to b3. So he wants to keep his bishop here, not trade it for the knight on c6. And now Ju just plays g5, chases away the bishop to g3. And now, again, you have to play it very precisely. You have to decide whether to maybe play bishop to e6 now, as this was your original plan, or go for rook to e8. But she goes knight to h5, and this just completely opens up the board. So, of course, her plan is to capture the bishop, as you will not be able to recapture. The bishop here is preventing this pawn from moving, as I know a lot of you guys forgot about this bishop. So here, Magnus just goes knight captures on e5. Now, okay, the queen is threatening to pick up the knight on h5, so she has to play knight captures on g3. And now the question is, how do you play this? Of course, we play knight captures on d7, queen captures on d7, and rook to e1. So what's happening here? If you count the pieces here, it seems that Magnus is down a piece. But even though this knight on g3 is still alive, how do you keep it? And this is a very important moment in the game. And even though Ju has a lot of time here, the situation on the clock is 12 minutes for Magnus and 8 minutes for Ju. She spends 7 minutes on her next move, as it's a very, very important one. How do you continue? You could continue incredibly aggressive with g4. Then Magnus, of course, would play d4. He would block this diagonal, and then you would just pick up the knight, but Black would get the attack. On the other hand, you could play d5, this central breakthrough. This is, according to the engine, the absolute best move, so she calculated it precisely. The problem is she's now below the 1 minute mark, whereas Magnus has still his 8 minutes on the clock. So Magnus plays e captures on d5, and now knight to e7. Now going for the full attack with knight to f5, knight to h4. She just wants to go all in. And if Magnus tries to play something like c4 and c5, then we can play bishop d4, and you are not locking out this bishop from this diagonal. Attack the rook. Let's say after rook to c1, we can go now knight e to f5, knight to h4, and continue our attack, and this would be incredibly difficult to stop for white, as Black is still up a piece. So that's very important. So instead, after knight to e7, we have knight to e7 was played instead of this, and now comes queen to g4. So again, what do you play here? You could trade queens, but you probably don't want to. You probably want to just defend this knight, and queen to d6 here seems to be like maybe the safest thing to do. But the problem is there's always this rook captures on e7 idea, and we will be picking up that knight. So probably rook captures, queen captures, and queen captures on g3. Now we give back a little material, and the end result would be this, that Ju would be up at the exchange. She would have a rook for a knight. On the downside, Magnus would be up 2 pawns, so it would be a pretty equalish position. However, after queen to g4, she played knight g to f5, and now things start to get very, very interesting. Now Magnus will again give up the rook. Rook captures on e7, queen captures, and queen captures on f5. But now White's pieces are much better placed. So king to g7. Again, you do not want your king on this diagonal. You know that this pawn is marching forward at some point, and then queen to g6 check idea will be possible, as the f pawn will be unable to recapture here. So king to g7, very important move to include. Now knight to e4, and now you can already imagine this knight coming to, well, maybe to g3, maybe to h5, then to f6 could be very, very dangerous. We have rook b to e8, and now Magnus should continue with this plan, knight g3, maybe here to here, but he goes for d6. He wants to open up this bishop's diagonal, and now what can she play? Well, she plays queen to e5 pretty instantly, because she's pretty much out of time, and she offers a queen trade. And while this is very good for white, Magnus plays g4 instead. He wants to complete the trade on his terms. C captures on d6, and now rook to a6, harassing the bishop here. We have bishop to c7, and now Magnus goes for rook to a7. Again, knight to g3 is always an idea, especially now if queens get traded off. You can capture this with check, and now it's just very, very hard for Black to play this. The bishop isn't all that great. The rook's not controlling all that much. White is still up a pawn, and even though Black is up the exchange, it will be very, very difficult to play this. So instead, after bishop c7, rook to a7 by Magnus, again attacking the bishop here, and now she counters with d5, challenges the knight here, and now Magnus captures, bishop captures on d5, and the queen captures on f5. We have g captures on f5, and now as the bishop is still hanging, we have bishop to f4. Probably the last attempt at a defense was rook to d8, challenging the light square bishop, which is undefended on d5, but even this would be difficult to hold. So bishop to f4 was played, but now Magnus just goes in for the kill. Knight to c5, now threatening knight to e6 check, which would win significant material, as the f-pawn is again unable to capture. Rook to e1 with check. We have king to g2, now king to g8, not unpinning basically, but now knight to d7, attacking the rook, going after this beautiful f6 square. She plays rook to e7, but now it's a very clean win for Magnus. Feel free to pause the video here and try to find the absolute strongest move for white while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on spotting any of the winning ideas like f6. But the absolute strongest and quickest way to win is the move that Magnus plays, and that is knight to f6 check. This means that now we are winning the rook. Or if king to g7, then she will be hoping for rook captures rook and king captures knight. But after king to g7, Magnus just played knight to h5. We've reached the position from the thumbnail, and it was in this position on move 37 that Wenjun resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. So the g6 square is covered, f6 squares is also covered. The king cannot access those squares, so you cannot attack the knight, you cannot defend the rook, and once the king moves, we're just gonna pick up the rook, and now we are up a full piece. Also, we are just, I mean, we are completely winning even without that piece, so this would be too overwhelming. So yeah, after this knight to h5 check, Ju resigned the game, and a wonderful victory for Magnus Carlsen in this penultimate round of the Charity Cup preliminaries. So yeah, as you can see, she defended very well, or rather, she played the entire game very well, and it all came down to this moment basically, where she spent most of her time, while she had 8 minutes on the clock, to decide whether to go for this very aggressive g4 or d5 idea, both of them having their merits, but she decided to go for d5. Like I said, the absolute strongest evaluated by the engine, and while it is the absolute strongest, she invested too much time in it, and it was simply impossible to play out the rest of the game with less than a minute on the clock. Sure, you get increment, but it's 15 seconds where every move is a critical one, so yeah, you're not gonna be able to pile up time, play a couple of quick moves in succession to maybe get like 2 minutes on the clock. So that's definitely not happening. But yeah, once again, hope you guys enjoyed it. I would like to thank Board Blueberry Friends NFT, Jonathan Sarnieto, Stefan Harsberger, Michael Kalberer, and Jay Langdon Consulting for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of the Charity Cup preliminaries until it finishes. So thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.